There are places on Earth where a single mistake can lead to irreversible consequences, where terrain, climate, and nature push humans into a state of pure survival. On these roads, drivers are not just traveling, they are confronting isolation, extreme weather, and landscapes that show no mercy. The first warning comes from deep within the Amazon. In Brazil, the BR-319 highway stretches for nearly 500 miles through dense rainforest. During the rainy season, the road turns into deep mud, where vehicles can easily lose control or sink, leaving drivers stranded in one of the most isolated places on Earth. The next danger rises from the open sea. Norway's Atlantic Ocean Road may look like a masterpiece of engineering, but when Atlantic storms arrive, waves crash directly onto the pavement. Strong winds and water can quickly make the road slippery, forcing drivers into a tense fight to keep their vehicles from losing control. And the final threat waits high in the Himalayas. India's Kishtwar-Killar Road clings to steep mountain cliffs thousands of feet above the valley. With narrow lanes and no guardrails, even a small mistake behind the wheel could send a vehicle plunging into the abyss. From jungle isolation to violent ocean storms and deadly mountain heights, these roads push drivers to their limits. Today, we explore some of the most dangerous roads on Earth. Roads you should never attempt to travel alone. BR-319 highway cuts through the heart of the Amazon rainforest as a fragile corridor across one of the most powerful ecosystems on Earth. The route stretches roughly 540 miles, linking the cities of Manaus and Porto Velho across an immense landscape of rivers, wetlands, and dense jungle. Originally built in the early 1970s, the road was part of a bold effort to connect remote regions of the Amazon with the rest of the country. During the rainy season, which can bring more than 90 inches of rainfall each year, long stretches of dirt road transform into thick mud, where heavy trucks struggle for traction and vehicles can slide across the slippery surface. In the worst conditions, vehicles can become trapped for hours or even days. Drivers sometimes rely on nearby rural communities where locals use tractors or improvised tools to help pull stranded vehicles out of the deep mud. Drivers often travel through hundreds of miles of forest where fuel stations, repair services, and even reliable communication are almost non-existent. Psychologically, the experience can be exhausting. The endless green horizon, long distances without settlements, and unpredictable road conditions demand constant attention behind the wheel. On BR-319, the real challenge is not speed or distance, but navigating a road constantly reshaped by rain, soil, and the relentless forces of the Amazon rainforest. Kishtwar to Killar Road winds along the rugged cliffs of the western Himalayas, connecting isolated mountain settlements through terrain that once required days of travel on foot. The route extends roughly 114 miles, but what makes it remarkable is not the distance. It is the way the road is carved directly into vertical rock faces above the deep Chenab River valley. Construction began in stages during the late 1970s when engineers blasted narrow ledges into the mountains to create a route between remote districts. In many places, the roadway measures barely 10 to 12 feet wide, forming a thin shelf of dirt and gravel pressed against solid stone. The surrounding geology constantly reshapes the road. Loose rock layers, steep slopes, and seasonal monsoon rains frequently trigger rockfalls, sending debris onto the narrow track and forcing vehicles to move cautiously through blind curves and unstable sections. The geography also creates a powerful psychological effect. Sheer cliffs drop thousands of feet below the roadway, while the road itself twists through sharp bends that reveal only a few yards of visibility at a time. Despite these risks, the road remains a critical lifeline for nearby communities. Every journey across this precarious route reflects a quiet negotiation between human persistence and the immense tectonic forces that lifted the Himalayas over 50 million years ago. Atlantic Ocean Road. Often celebrated as one of the most beautiful coastal drives in the world, Atlantic Ocean Road hides a far more dangerous reality beneath its scenic views. The route stretches about 5.2 miles, linking scattered islands with 8 bridges that rise directly above the restless waters of the Norwegian Sea. Construction began in the early 1980s and lasted nearly 6 years, a difficult project constantly interrupted by extreme weather. During that time, the construction site was struck by at least 12 major Atlantic storms, forcing engineers to halt work repeatedly while waves and wind battered the unfinished structures. The most dramatic section is the Store Sundet Bridge, which climbs nearly 75 feet above the water before curving sharply toward the next island. From certain angles, the bridge appears to leap into the air, creating a disorienting visual effect that can surprise unfamiliar drivers approaching the curve. But the real danger comes from the power of the ocean itself. During winter storms, waves can rise more than 30 feet, crashing across the roadway while violent crosswinds sweep over the narrow bridges, making the asphalt slick and unpredictable. In calm weather, the road feels like a scenic coastal masterpiece. But when the North Atlantic turns hostile, this thin strip of pavement becomes a dangerous battle between human engineering and the raw force of the sea. Abano Pass is often described as one of the most dangerous mountain roads in Europe. The route climbs to an altitude of about 9,270 feet, cutting across the rugged Caucasus Mountains and linking the remote region of Tusheti with the lowlands. The road itself is roughly 43 miles long, but distance here means little compared to the challenge of the terrain. Much of the route is a narrow dirt track carved directly into steep mountain slopes, where loose gravel, sharp switchbacks, and sudden drops create constant tension behind the wheel. The psychological pressure is impossible to ignore. With towering cliffs on one side and deep valleys on the other, even experienced drivers often move forward at less than 20 miles per hour, carefully guiding their vehicles through tight bends and unstable surfaces. Because the pass remains open only a few months each year, traffic stays relatively low. Yet local authorities still record occasional accidents caused by rockfalls, sudden fog, and drivers underestimating the extreme conditions of the high Caucasus. For those who attempt the journey, the rule is simple. Patience matters more than speed. On Abano Pass, every mile demands focus, respect for the mountains, and the steady nerve to continue climbing through one of the wildest landscapes in the region. Grimsel Pass. High in the Central Alps, Grimsel Pass winds through a stark landscape of granite peaks, glacial lakes, and sweeping mountain valleys. The road climbs to an elevation of about 7,165 feet, crossing a high alpine saddle that has connected mountain communities for centuries. Long before modern asphalt appeared, this route existed as a narrow trade path. As early as the 14th century, merchants and mule caravans crossed these mountains, carrying salt, livestock, and textiles between valleys separated by towering ridges. The modern road began taking shape in the early 1900s, eventually stretching roughly 24 miles through steep terrain carved by ancient glaciers. Engineers designed a sequence of tight switchbacks and gradual climbs, allowing vehicles to navigate slopes that once could only be crossed on foot. Heavy snowfall and avalanches can bury the pass under several feet of snow, forcing closures for nearly 6 months each year. while sudden fog can transform the wide-open mountain views into a wall of white within minutes. Despite careful engineering, the road's narrow curves and steep drop-offs have led to occasional accidents over the decades, particularly during wet or icy conditions. Grimsel Pass is often admired for its breathtaking scenery, yet the road also tells a deeper story. It is a place where human engineering meets the raw geology of the Alps, and where every turn follows a landscape shaped by ice, gravity, and time. Spiti Valley Road winds through one of the most isolated, high-altitude deserts in the Himalayas, where driving quickly becomes a test of endurance rather than a simple journey. The route climbs toward Kunzum Pass at nearly 4,556 meters above sea level, where thin air begins to affect both engines and human concentration. Nearly 80% of its surface is made of gravel, loose rock, and dirt instead of asphalt, forcing vehicles to crawl along narrow mountain ledges with steep cliffs on one side and icy rivers far below. At elevations above 11,000 feet, oxygen levels drop noticeably, and hours of navigating tight curves along exposed mountainsides can quickly lead to fatigue and slower reaction times. If a vehicle breaks down, the nearest help may be hours away across the harsh and rugged terrain of the Himalayas. Local drivers share a simple rule for surviving the Spiti Road. Drive slowly, start early before glacial streams grow stronger, and never underestimate the unpredictable power of the mountains. Svavogar, Route 622, winds along one of the wildest coastlines in Iceland's remote Westfjords. The route stretches roughly 25 miles, hugging steep mountains that plunge directly into the cold waters of the North Atlantic. Much of the road remains unpaved, a narrow ribbon of gravel carved into cliffs shaped by glaciers and volcanic forces over 10,000 years ago. In some places, the track narrows to barely 10 feet wide, leaving little margin between the vehicle and the rocky slopes above or the ocean far below. As I follow the road, the landscape feels almost untouched. The Westfjords receive powerful ocean weather systems, and winds can easily exceed 50 miles per hour, pushing against the vehicle while waves pound the jagged coastline. The geology here also makes the road unpredictable. Loose volcanic rock and steep coastal slopes occasionally send small landslides across the path, forcing travelers to slow down and navigate around fresh debris. Driving along Route 622 becomes less about distance and more about awareness. Sharp bends appear suddenly, visibility shifts with coastal fog, and the isolation is striking. Sometimes miles pass without another vehicle in sight. Local advice is simple but meaningful. On roads like this, patience matters more than speed, because in the West Fjords, nature still dictates how the journey unfolds. Strada delle 52 Gallerie is one of the most unusual mountain routes ever carved into the Italian Alps. The road was constructed in 1917 during World War I, when the Italian army needed a hidden supply route through the mountains that could not be easily targeted by enemy artillery. The entire path stretches about 4 miles, climbing more than 2,600 feet along a steep alpine slope. Its most extraordinary feature is a chain of 52 tunnels, carved directly into solid limestone by military units working with drills, explosives, and hand tools. Some tunnels run only a short distance, while others extend for more than 1,000 feet, twisting through the mountain before opening suddenly onto exposed cliffside ledges. Walking through long tunnels where daylight disappears, then stepping onto ledges high above the valley creates a powerful sense of scale and exposure. Strada delle 52 Gallerie shows how determination during World War I literally reshaped the mountain, carving an entire pathway through rock high above the alpine valleys. As I begin the climb toward Furka Pass, the road unfolds like a ribbon across the raw spine of the Swiss Alps. The pass rises to about 8,242 feet above sea level, where the air feels thinner and the landscape is shaped by glaciers, rock, and time. This route has existed for centuries as a mountain crossing between alpine valleys, but the modern road began taking form in the mid-19th century, eventually stretching roughly 22 miles through steep terrain. Hairpin turns stack one after another as the road climbs across exposed slopes overlooking the Upper Rhone Valley. As I continue upward, the environment becomes part of the challenge. Strong mountain winds sweep across the open pass, while sudden fog can erase the distant peaks within minutes, leaving only the narrow asphalt and the next curve ahead. Each turn demands patience and focus. The elevation, tight switchbacks, and sheer scale of the mountains create a strange mix of excitement and tension. Move slowly, respect the mountain, and remember that every mile of this road exists within a landscape far older and far more powerful than the vehicles that cross it. Kinnaur Road threads its way through the dramatic landscape of the Western Himalayas, where towering cliffs and deep river gorges define the terrain. The route stretches for more than 150 miles, following sections of the historic Hindustan-Tibet trade corridor that once connected the Indian plains with markets across the mountains. In several places, the passage narrows to barely 10 to 12 feet, forming a tight ledge blasted through solid stone where the mountain rises sharply on one side and plunges into a deep gorge on the other. The geology of the Himalayas makes the environment especially unstable. These mountains were pushed upward by tectonic forces more than 50 million years ago, and the rock layers remain fractured and fragile. Some parts of Kinnaur Road even pass through natural rock overhangs and tunnels carved into the cliff itself, creating brief corridors where the mountain literally hangs above the roadway. The danger here is rarely about speed. Instead, it is the combination of narrow passages, loose rock, and sharp blind curves that demands patience and careful movement along the route. Move slowly, stay alert to shifting terrain, and respect a landscape that is still actively being shaped by the immense geological forces of the Himalayas. Chapman's Peak Drive curves along the dramatic edge of the Cape Peninsula, where steep mountains descend directly into the Atlantic Ocean. The road stretches for about 5.5 miles, linking the coastal communities of Hout Bay and Noordhoek through one of the most striking landscapes in southern Africa. Today, the drive includes 114 curves, each following the natural contours of the mountain as the road rises high above the crashing waves below. The scenery here is breathtaking, but the geology can also be unpredictable. Loose rock formations along the steep slopes have occasionally triggered rockfalls, which led to a major safety upgrade and reopening of the road in 2003 with protective netting and reinforced barriers. Chapman's Peak Drive is often described as one of the world's most scenic coastal roads. Yet the safest way to enjoy it remains simple. Slow down, respect the curves, and remember that this spectacular route exists where powerful ocean forces meet ancient mountain rock. White Rim Road is a road I've come to respect more than fear, though it demands both. Down here in the vast desert landscape of Canyonlands, the route forms a long loop of about 100 miles, tracing a narrow shelf of sandstone between the towering cliffs above and the deep canyons carved by the Colorado and Green Rivers. The track follows a geological layer called the White Rim, a band of pale sandstone deposited roughly 200 million years ago when this region was covered by ancient coastal plains and shifting desert dunes. Steep switchbacks, rocky ledges, and sections of loose sand make parts of the road feel more like an expedition route than a typical drive. From my experience, the psychological challenge comes from the scale of the landscape itself. Cliffs rise nearly 1,000 feet above the road in some areas, while vast canyons open on the other side, creating a sense of exposure that stretches far beyond the horizon. Around here, we keep the advice simple. Drive slowly, bring plenty of water, and remember that on White Rim Road, patience is more important than horsepower in a place shaped by millions of years of desert geology. Crown Range Road. Winding through the high mountains of New Zealand's South Island, Crown Range Road crosses one of the highest sealed mountain passes in the country. The route runs for roughly 47 miles, connecting the towns of Queenstown and Wanaka across a rugged alpine landscape. The road climbs to an elevation of about 3,790 feet, where open slopes of golden tussock grass stretch across hills formed by powerful glacial activity thousands of years ago. A series of sharp, hairpin turns and steep gradients, reaching nearly 10%, force vehicles to climb slowly along the mountainside. The scenery is breathtaking, with wide alpine valleys and distant peaks unfolding around nearly every bend. The true challenge of the road lies in its rhythm of tight curves and steep elevation changes. Drivers must carefully manage speed and braking while navigating a landscape where the mountains seem to rise endlessly beyond the edge of the pavement. Here, patience and steady control matter far more than speed, because even a modern road must adapt to the powerful geography of the Southern Alps. El Caminito del Rey is one of the most dramatic cliffside walkways I guide visitors through in southern Spain. The route stretches roughly 5 miles through the steep limestone walls of the El Chorro Gorge, suspended high above the rushing Guadalhorce River. The original path was built around 1905 to allow workers to travel between hydroelectric facilities along the canyon. In 1921, King Alfonso XIII crossed the route during the inauguration of a nearby dam, giving the walkway its famous name, the King's Little Path. For decades, the structure slowly deteriorated as sections of concrete collapsed and metal supports rusted away. In some places, the remaining fragments clung to the cliff more than 300 feet above the canyon floor, turning the path into one of the most dangerous routes in Europe. My advice is always simple: walk steadily, respect the height, And remember that this narrow path exists in a place where sheer geology once made passage nearly impossible. Col de Torini rises through the rugged terrain of the Maritime Alps, forming one of the most dramatic mountain crossings in southeastern France. The pass reaches an elevation of about 5,280 feet, linking the Vesubie and Roya valleys through a steep and winding alpine landscape. The modern road gradually developed in the late 19th century, expanding from older mountain trails once used by traders and shepherds moving between isolated alpine villages. Today, the route stretches roughly 20 miles, but its defining feature is a sequence of more than 30 sharp hairpin turns carved into the mountainside. These tight switchbacks follow the steep geometry of the Alps, forcing the road to climb in tight spirals through dense forests and rocky ridges. The pass later gained global fame through the legendary Rally Monte Carlo, where professional rally drivers navigate the same narrow curves at extraordinary speeds. On Col de Torini, the safest approach is patience. Slow down before the hairpins, maintain steady control through the turns, and respect a mountain road shaped as much by alpine geography as by human design. Los Machucos climbs through the rugged mountains of northern Spain, hidden deep within the dramatic landscape of the Cantabrian Range. The road stretches roughly 4 miles, but within that short distance it rises steeply toward an elevation of about 2,100 feet, cutting through green pastures and rocky alpine slopes. For generations, this route existed only as a narrow agricultural path used by local farmers moving cattle between mountain fields. Certain sections climb at slopes approaching 28%, a steepness rarely seen on paved public roads. The narrow pavement twists sharply through the mountainside, leaving little space for vehicles to maneuver comfortably. Surrounding the road are sweeping views of the lush Cantabrian valleys, where rolling green hills stretch toward distant limestone peaks shaped by millions of years of geological uplift. Yet the beauty hides the real challenge. Sharp bends, sudden elevation changes, and extremely steep grades require careful control, especially on the climb where engines and brakes are pushed to their limits. On Los Machucos, the safest approach is simple. Climb slowly, use lower gears on steep sections, and respect a mountain road whose extreme slopes reveal just how demanding the terrain of northern Spain can be. Hard Knot Pass winds through the rugged heart of England's Lake District, crossing a landscape shaped by ancient volcanic activity more than 400 million years ago. The road climbs to about 1,290 feet, cutting across steep green valleys and rocky hills. The route itself is short, only about 3 miles long, but its design makes it one of the most challenging drives in the United Kingdom. A sequence of extremely tight hairpin bends forces the road to climb sharply along the mountainside. Some sections reach gradients close to 33%, making it one of the steepest paved roads in the country. Long before modern traffic, the route followed an ancient Roman pathway built during the 2nd century to connect the nearby Hard Knot Roman fort with other military outposts. Today the scenery is peaceful, with sweeping views of green hills and distant lakes. Hana Highway winds along the lush, northeastern coast of Maui, cutting through a tropical landscape shaped by ancient volcanic activity and constant Pacific rainfall. The road stretches roughly 64 miles, linking the town of Kahului with the remote community of Hana. Originally developed in the early 1900s, the route follows terrain formed by lava flows from the massive Haleakala. Over time, engineers carved the highway through dense rainforest valleys and steep coastal cliffs. The journey includes more than 600 curves and about 59 narrow bridges, many of which were originally built wide enough for only a single lane of traffic. Waterfalls tumble down volcanic cliffs, thick jungle vegetation crowds the edges of the pavement, and the Pacific Ocean appears suddenly between sharp bends. Slow speeds, steady control, and respect for the narrow passages help travelers experience one of Hawaii's most spectacular roads without rushing through its remarkable landscape. Dempster Highway stretches across one of the most remote landscapes in North America, cutting through vast Arctic wilderness and permafrost terrain. The route runs for about 460 miles, linking the Yukon interior with the small Arctic community of Inuvik. Construction began in the late 1950s, and the highway officially opened in 1979. Engineers faced a unique challenge because much of the ground here remains permanently frozen. To prevent the road from sinking into thawing soil, large gravel embankments were built to insulate the permafrost beneath the highway. Fuel stations may be more than 200 miles apart, and mechanical problems can leave travelers far from assistance. On the Dempster Highway, preparation becomes the most important safety rule. Extra fuel, supplies, and patience are essential when traveling a road that crosses nearly 460 miles of raw northern wilderness. Trampoline de la Muerte clings to the steep eastern slopes of the Andes, where mountains begin to descend toward the Amazon rainforest. The route stretches roughly 40 miles, yet the journey often takes more than 3 hours as vehicles carefully navigate the narrow mountain track. In many places, the roadway measures barely 10 to 12 feet wide, leaving little room for vehicles along steep drop-offs. The surrounding environment is dramatic and unpredictable. Moist air from the Amazon frequently forms thick fog along the mountains, while heavy rainfall turns parts of the dirt road into slick mud. These conditions, combined with tight bends and sheer cliffs, have led to numerous accidents over the years, giving the route its ominous name, which translates as the trampoline of death. Despite its reputation, the road remains essential for local travel. Moving slowly, watching blind corners, and respecting the unstable terrain are the simplest ways to cross this demanding Andean route safely. Patiopolo-Pertikachi Road winds through the remote mountains of western Greece, where steep limestone ridges and deep valleys dominate the rugged landscape. The route runs roughly 15 miles, connecting small villages that were once separated by difficult mountain terrain. Much of the road was carved into the mountains during the late 1970s, when workers blasted narrow ledges through solid rock to create a basic transportation link for local communities. In many sections, the roadway measures only 10 to 12 feet wide, leaving little space for passing vehicles. Sharp, blind curves and loose gravel make the route especially challenging. With steep drop-offs beside the road, careful control becomes essential. On this narrow mountain passage, the safest strategy is simple. Drive slowly, stay alert around blind turns, and respect a road that still reflects the raw geography of the Greek highlands. Ma Pi Leng Pass cuts across the towering limestone mountains of northern Vietnam, forming one of the most dramatic sections of the famous Ha Giang Loop. The pass stretches roughly 12 miles, climbing along steep ridges of the Dong Van Karst Plateau, a geological landscape formed more than 400 million years ago. Construction of the road began in the late 1950s, when thousands of local workers spent nearly 6 years carving the route into the cliffs using basic tools and explosives. In several places, the road clings directly to vertical rock walls high above the deep canyon of the No Quay River. From above, the landscape reveals towering limestone peaks and winding turquoise water far below. The road itself twists through sharp curves along narrow ledges where the mountains drop dramatically into the valley. Travelers who cross Ma Pi Leng quickly discover a simple rule: slow speeds, careful braking, and patience are essential when traveling a road carved into one of Southeast Asia's most spectacular mountain landscapes. Passage du Gois is one of the most unusual roads in Europe, a narrow causeway that appears and disappears with the rhythm of the ocean. Stretching about 2.5 miles, the road connects the mainland town of Beauvoir-sur-Mer with the island of Noirmoutier across a tidal bay of the Atlantic. The path has existed for centuries, first discovered in the 16th century when travelers realized that the seabed briefly emerged during extremely low tides. Modern paving later transformed the muddy route into a solid stone and asphalt causeway, but the ocean still controls when it can be used. Twice each day, powerful Atlantic tides rise quickly and cover the entire roadway under several feet of water. Drivers must carefully time their crossing within a window of roughly 1 to 2 hours before and after low tide. Yet the danger is real. Each year, several vehicles become stranded when the tide returns faster than expected, forcing drivers to climb nearby rescue towers, rising about 40 feet above the road while waiting for help. The safest rule here is simple. Always check the tide schedule before crossing, because on Passage du Gois, the ocean decides exactly when the road exists. Baybird Off-Road winds through one of the most dramatic sections of the Pontic Mountains, where history, altitude, and raw geology combine to shape a road that feels almost experimental. The route climbs to roughly 6,600 feet above sea level, threading along steep mountain walls that were once carved by soldiers of the Russian army around 1916 to move artillery through the region during wartime. Large portions were hacked directly into vertical rock, using only primitive tools and explosives, leaving a narrow shelf of gravel and stone that hugs the mountainside for nearly 8 miles. The surrounding landscape is both beautiful and intimidating. Sharp ridges, deep valleys, and scattered alpine grasslands stretch across the horizon, while sudden mountain fog can roll in within minutes. Crossing this road demands patience and caution. Slow speeds, careful braking, and constant awareness of the cliffside terrain are essential, because on Baybird Off-Road, the mountain always sets the rules. Bernina Express is often praised for its beauty, yet behind the postcard scenery lies a route shaped by some of the harshest terrain in the Alps. Completed in 1910, the railway was engineered to cross the mountains without tunnels at the highest section, forcing the line to climb directly through steep alpine slopes and narrow valleys. The journey stretches roughly 76 miles, linking the town of Chur with Tirano, while reaching an altitude of about 7,400 feet at the Bernina Pass. To manage such elevation, the railway bends through 196 bridges and viaducts and passes through 55 tunnels, creating a complex structure that grips the mountainside like a steel ribbon. Glaciers, turquoise alpine lakes, and jagged granite peaks dominate the horizon, while sudden weather shifts can transform bright sunlight into thick mountain fog within minutes. After more than a century of operation, the Bernina Express proves that even in the most unforgiving mountains, careful design and patience can turn danger into one of the world's most extraordinary journeys. Dades Gorge Road winds through a canyon carved by the Dades River over millions of years, slicing deep into the rugged Atlas Mountains. The modern road follows this ancient geological corridor for nearly 25 miles, climbing steep canyon walls where layers of red limestone rise like enormous stone staircases. Much of the route was gradually expanded during the 1930s, when regional trade routes were widened to connect isolated Berber villages scattered across the valley. The most famous section is a series of tightly stacked switchbacks that rise sharply up the canyon face, a twisting staircase of asphalt that climbs hundreds of feet within just a short stretch of road. Slow speeds and careful attention to blind curves matter here, because along Dades Gorge Road, the mountains always have the final word.